But I won't go into that right now. But just like this attitude, and what about all the horrible things that are happening that aren't contributing to climate change? What about like how did you become an environmentalist if you are one? Is it because of all the money that you'll save? Is it really because you're afraid that loss of biodiversity will deprive you of medicines from the rainforest in the future? Or is it because it just hurts to see those clear cuts? Is it because you had some experience? My wife is telling me about this pond she grew up on. And when she was a kid, there were snakes and frogs and turtles, and it was full of life. And now, last time she went back, like it was really exciting to even see like one frog. The whole thing was dying. You know? I think that environmentalism, really committed environmentalism, comes from beauty and grief. Because at bottom, this mindset of instrumental utilitarianism is a delusion. Really, the earth is part of us and we're part of the earth. That's why it hurts. It hurts because it's happening to ourselves. And that's what we've got to connect people with. So this is part of the new story. The new story is intervening. The new story says, who are you? Not a separate individual. You are the totality of your relationships. You are a reflection of everything. And everything is a reflection of you. And every relationship you have is a mirror of yourself. And every event in your life has an interior image. And I won't be so crass as to say beliefs create reality. But I'm saying that the inner mirrors the outer in some way that is very mysterious and complicated. Therefore, that woman taking care of her mother, she is changing the world. One way to look at it, I like to use Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance. One reason I like to use it is that Rupert Sheldrake is a double plus ungood crime thinker for defenders of scientific orthodoxy. Does that reference make sense to you guys?
No.
I'm an Orwell fan, George Orwell. He's public enemy number one. So if you want to tweak somebody, mention Rupert Sheldrake. But anyway, so his theory of, I can talk more about him, but his theory of morphic resonance says essentially that anything that happens anywhere creates a field of, any change that happens in one place creates a field of change that makes that same change more likely to happen somewhere else. So, like for example, he talks about, I think it's xylitol or some sugar alcohol that chemists were trying to make it crystallize in the 1920s or 30s or something, so they could use it as a food additive. And they couldn't make it work. They tried different catalysts, different pressure, different temperature, They couldn't make it crystallize until finally a lab in like New Zealand or something finally got it to crystallize. Thereafter, labs all over the place could make it crystallize easily, using almost any technique. It was as if the substance learned how to do it. Now that violates the standard story that we live in, because what's the causal mechanism? And substances can't learn because they're just stuff. This is part of the old story. The universe outside ourselves does not have the qualities of a self. That's what allows us to exploit and manipulate it as if it didn't have any beingness. If the world outside of ourselves isn't sacred, it isn't generative, it isn't productive, if it doesn't have a movement towards something, a purpose, a destination, if it doesn't have any of that stuff, then we might as well engineer it and manipulate it as much as possible. It doesn't care about us. It's not going anywhere. We have to impose our own purpose, intelligence, consciousness on this dead universe composed of generic particles that don't have beings. So, I'm trying to say two things at once here. But I guess I'll be linear. So the first thing is that anything that you do from a place of compassion and service and love creates or strengthens the field of that. The field of that makes it happen everywhere else too. Perhaps through easily understandable causal mechanisms. Maybe you hear a beautiful story of compassion and you hear the story and so you feel inspired too. You witness an act of generosity that nobody knew was being witnessed, like that policeman who gave his boots to a homeless man, not knowing he was on camera. He had no calculus in which that was going to help the world beyond this one man. But then millions of people saw it. So it could be through the way that the field spreads, could be through something that's very mundane. But it could be through something mysterious. Standing in the new story, the story of interbeing, we have confidence that anything we do will ripple out in one way or another, and we don't have to know how, we don't have to contrive. We don't have to document what we're doing while we're doing it so that we can share it with the world. When you do that, sometimes it loses its authenticity. We can have, and I'm not saying that we should just only take care of the old woman or whoever and not engage in political action or something like that. These are all coming from the same place. Because really, even if you're involved in political action, you can still ask yourself that question: what good is it going to do? What difference does it make? Even if I do manage to, change the zoning ordinance in Chapel Hill to allow backyard chickens, even if I do win this small victory, what does that matter in the face of 7 million tons of plastic in the ocean? In the old story, nothing you do matters. So you have to concoct some kind of moral code, some kind of ethical code, which you live by, knowing that it doesn't do any good. So, I'll say one more thing about another piece of the news story, which I've been circling around. In contrast to the dead, generic world of force and mass, the news story says that the world outside of ourselves does have the qualities of the self: intelligence, consciousness, purpose. In this room, it's a little hard to believe. Because look around us. Everything is standard. Everything is square. Every single one of these seats is more or less identical. Each panel on the ceiling. But if we were outdoors, we would have a different experience. Here, it looks like only we ourselves. In a commodity economy, that's how it looks. Outdoors, though, if you really look at, just pick up a flower or something, or just look at a cloud, or a tree, that childish part of you, or you could say that indigenous part of you, because this is a universal view among indigenous people, as far as I know. That part of you knows that this is a being. even a rock. It's a being. It's a brother. Or a grandfather. It has an experience. It has a selfness. It's not just H2O. It's not just mineral. It's not just protons, neutrons, and electrons in some different configuration. There's something beyond that. And that conflicts with another basic precept of science, which goes back to the time of Galileo, which says only the measurable is real. Galileo said that more or less explicitly. Science is the study of the measurable. And so progress in science became to extend measurement into more and more realms. Anyway, and the story that says that your small invisible actions that aren't a book and a documentary and a big thing are insignificant, that's because they don't have measurable utilitarian outcomes, or the measurement is very, very small. So this way of thinking is quite pervasive. But you look at the rock, and you know that it has beings. A child knows it, an indigenous person knows it. But we've gotten beyond that. Now we know that that's just an anthropomorphic projection. A projection of human qualities onto inanimate stuff, onto animals and plants and rocks and water and clouds and the planet and the sun, which is just a ball of hydrogen gas, that's all. And water is just a chemical. We know better now, don't we? And the proof that we know better is that all the technology that's come from that worldview, which has given us such wonderful lives. And, oh, wait a minute. There's a problem here. I mean, you could believe that maybe in the 60s. But now, it's becoming obvious that this whole worldview is causing the world to fall apart. The story is falling apart. It's staring us in the face. The environmental, the ecological crisis is making it impossible to believe that we have things well in hand and that further extension of the technologies of control is going to make life better and better. Life stopped getting better and better in this country in 1973, really. That's when leisure time peaked. That's when physical fitness peaked. So the story is collapsing. I mean, even in science, the science that I've described is obsolete. I mean, in quantum mechanics, it's not true that things only change course when there's a force exerted on them. In quantum mechanics, it looks very much like, and I'm going to be careful with my words here, it looks very much like when an electron or a photon goes through a slit, that it chooses a path. This one goes this way, that one goes that way, that one goes another way, and the forces on each one are identical. An indigenous person says, well, of course, that's because they're each unique individual, so of course they make a different choice. And I could go through, systems theory, emergent phenomena that escape reductionistic explanation, biology where we're understanding that symbiosis and cooperation and self-organization are maybe even more important than competition in determining the course of evolution. I mean, there's, in one area after another, the story's breaking down from within science, it's breaking down economically, it's breaking down in every way. So, as this story falls apart, we enter what Frank was mentioning, the space between stories, where we don't know what's real anymore. We don't know what's true anymore. We don't know how things work anymore. Many of us have gone through this already on an individual level. But you probably have people in your lives who are still very much in the old story. Anyway, it takes me like 5 days to really go through all of this, so I'm just kind of picking a few things. But I'm just going to read a poem to you that I just happened to take with me. I just put it in my suitcase, and it's by a Navajo, Tom Torlino, written in 1890. Spoken, probably, and then written down. I am humble before the earth. I am humble before the sky. I am humble before the dawn. I am humble before the evening twilight. I am humble before the blue sky. I am humbled before the darkness. I am humbled before the sun. I am humbled before that standing within me, which speaks of me. Some of these things are always looking at me. I am never out of sight. Therefore, I always tell the truth. That is why I always tell the truth. I hold my word tight to my breast. Anthropomorphic projection run rampant. Is this yet another time where the white civilized person knows better than the native? Or is it a time, perhaps, where we need to learn from these other worldviews, the ancient story that's been preserved as our story falls apart? Our story of separation, control, domination, mastery. So you may be thinking of somebody in your life who's stuck in the old story. You're still looking for them. Stories have a lifespan. Part of the story of force is that to change somebody's mind, all you have to do is present them with superior evidence and logic. But just try that with your climate change denying uncle. And you'll find that people don't make their decisions based on evidence and logic. They don't form their beliefs based on evidence and logic. And that trying to overcome them by force doesn't work. Why? Because their beliefs sit inside larger invisible stories in which they are at home. In my book, I wrote a story about, it's a true story, an encounter with a woman who was a Nestle executive. And she made an eloquent presentation at this conference about how Nestle was an environmental champion, spearheading reduced plastic use in their bottles, giving money to orangutan preservation, like, a glowing presentation she made. And she seemed quite sincere. I mean, one story is that she's, a duplicitous PR flack. She doesn't believe a word that she says because she's cynical and evil and greedy. She's getting paid. But she didn't come across that way. And when I went up to talk to her afterwards, because I was curious, where did she come from? There was a college student kind of interrogating her. A college student said, well, wouldn't it be better, she was asking some naive questions, wouldn't it be better, instead of using 40% less plastic, to use no plastic bottles? And the woman said, well, you don't know that plastic is made of a byproduct of petroleum refining, and if we didn't use it for plastic, it would just be dumped in the environment anyway. It doesn't really do any harm. And the girl said, well, wouldn't it be better for people to drink out of tap water? And the woman said, well, tap water is getting more and more polluted, and people have such busy lifestyles, they're on the go all the time, and it's good for them to have an alternative to soda water. And whenever that girl said, she had a ready response. And I thought, if you take for granted what the Nestle executive takes for granted, her position is irrefutable. If you take for granted that we're going to keep refining petroleum. If you take for granted that life is going to get busier and busier and faster, if you take for granted that tap water is going to be more and more polluted, then you really have no argument. But it's these deep stories that ultimately rest in the story of ascent that says that technology is going to make the world better and better, and we're going to come up with a technological solution to every problem. Nothing can stop us. If you believe that, then there's really no problem with plastic or any other ecosystem problem. So I think that we need, so this is, and I'm going to end soon and do something else, but I think that we need to work at this level of story, which means sometimes, so to disrupt the story of separation and to offer a story of intervening. Sometimes this can take the form of political action, like a general strike disrupts the story of business as usual, or the striking Walmart workers or Walmart workers disrupt the story of, oh, they're happy in their jobs, they're associates. You know, like this is a way of disrupting the story. But while doing this, if the meta-narrative is those corporate bosses are evil, horrible people, then you're going to be less effective. Because again, that's a delusion. And you're going to be strengthening the story of the war on evil. So you're going to be working across purposes. So I think we need to find ways to disrupt the story at every level. And sometimes, maybe your calling isn't political. Maybe you are working much more on a community level, an interpersonal level. And I think even then, like any act of forgiveness or generosity or unconditional love, is a political act. Because it erodes the foundation of the whole system that we live in. That foundation is separation and the fear and desire to control that comes from it. Now I realize I've skipped over a lot of things. I mean, I could talk for an hour on psychopathy, for example. There's a chapter in my book. I mean, what about psychopaths? What about this? What about that? So I'm just kind of giving you, I'm telling you a story. And in a minute, I think what I'll do, we can do some Q&A, and also there's a dialogue process or two that we might do. But let me just finish with one idea. Picking up on the statement that stories themselves have a lifespan. When they're young and strong, they have a strong immune system and can easily discard any data point that doesn't fit into the story. When they age, they begin to unravel. The world falls apart. Some of you might be in this place between stories. I think that our civilization also is entering the place between stories, where we don't know what's real anymore. We don't know what things mean anymore. We don't know how to create change in the way that we used to anymore. Nothing works the way it used to. On a personal level, it could be that you go to the doctor and the doctor can't fix you. Or you study hard in school and you get good grades and you get these degrees and you still can't find a job. Or you do everything right, everything according to plan, and you end up, life falls apart anyway. And so everything that you took for granted, everything that seems so permanent, is revealed as just illusion. And that's a really sacred place. Just because you're in that place doesn't mean that a new story has arisen. You might be in this in-between place for a very long time. And if you are, and you might go back and forth too. And if so, really trust that place. A new story will call to you. It'll awaken in you. So, well, I think maybe I'm not going to pursue this thread too much longer. Let's I'd like to invite you all to tell a certain kind of story to the person next to you. Think for a minute of somebody that you've known. Like the woman I described at the beginning, someone who works on that kind of invisible level. These are the people that hold the world together. You know, it doesn't take that much fortitude to do what I do. It's like, you know, like I get all these letters from people saying, oh, Charles, your books are so wonderful, they're changing the world, et cetera, right? So I constantly get a voice saying, like validating it, but not like the kindergarten teacher, you know, not the hospice worker, you know, not the people in humble roles of service, maybe just within a family. But you probably know somebody like that, who is just powerful reservoir, I'm mixing metaphors here, of generosity, kindness, service. Probably know somebody like that. So I'm going to give you a minute of silence to bring that person into your mind, into your field. Just sit quietly for a minute. Somebody who is in a powerful way living already in the new story. Invite that person into the room. And now find a neighbor, and in just a minute or two, tell your neighbor in one anecdote about something that this person did. A little vignette. Is that hard? You're going to do a general description for what it is. Yeah. If you don't have anybody, then you know what? If you don't have anybody, let's have another minute of silence. Yeah, somebody who occupies a place of generosity, compassion, service, love, selflessness. They don't have to have a conceptual understanding of the new story. They're just love. Maybe I will seed the field by telling the story with them. He was a kindergarten teacher, a Montessori teacher. Richard, his name was. Beautiful man. And I was looking for a place for my kids. And I had a lot of doubts about, putting them anywhere, but there were no kids outside. It was pretty barren. So I visited the school. Within 10 seconds, I knew that it was a special place. And there was something about this guy. He would kneel down. When the kid wanted to talk to him, he'd kneel down and look at the kid, face to face. And you could tell that he really cared about what that kid was saying. There was not the tiniest bit of patronizing or condescension, of any patronizing attitude or condescension in his attitude. He was invading with genuine respect to those kids. And I thought, this is one of the most important men in the world. Okay, so turn to your neighbor. If you don't have somebody, that's okay. You can just listen.
As I got to know